Hey everyone, I am Rob and you are in the Abyss. Today we are finishing off the 90s. It's 1999, and as you saw yesterday, our list started to shrink. But boy, 99, I I don't know if I have a favorite movie. I have some movies I like, but I think the favorite might be just by default because of the movie I've seen the most or I've watched the most or whatever, and I don't even know if that qualifies. Um, Another group of movies I am leaving out. I don't want to hear about American Beauty. I don't want to hear about Varsity Blues. I don't want to hear about Eyes Wide Shut or The Sixth Sense or I don't know if I left any out, but I like The Sixth Sense. I don't go back to it that much. Varsity Blues is a cute little story, but the acting's atrocious. American Beauty, one of the most overrated films in the history of film, in my opinion. Um, that's just to name a few. Eyes Wide Shut. I like the acting, the constant piano, and the crazy story and stuff like that you get in that movie is you know Kubrick at his finest or his worst, whatever you want to think. But it was really his last film, and I was scouring around as I was pulling these movies and looking for it because I thought maybe I owned it, but I don't even think I own it. And if I do, I can't find it. So it tells you how that kind of moves down the list for me. Anyways, I do have about 12 movies to show you. And once again, some of them are going to be ones that you guys would have on your list. Other ones you may not have even heard of. But a lot of this is to A, go over the acting, and then B, to make you guys watch films that maybe you've wanted to watch and haven't, or you haven't heard of. So our first comedy for 1999 is a movie called Love Stinks. French Stewart, Bill Bellamy, Bridget Wilson. You're not watching this movie for the acting, but the way that they go at each other, it has some really funny moments. And once again, French Stewart is more of a writer than he is an actor, but the way he is in this and in the way that Bridget Wilson uses him, it really does make for a pretty funny comedy. But once again, you're watching this for the entertainment value. You are not watching this for the acting value. Next up, one that I know you guys like comedy-wise, Office Space, Ron Livingston, Jennifer Aniston, but for me it's Gary Cole. He's awesome. We talked about him the other day with the Brady Bunch. He's just really good. Actually, the first time I actually was introduced to Gary Cole, he was in a movie called Fatal Vision, and it was a true story about a guy who had killed his family and then kind of made it seem like it was a Manson thing. He was a military guy, and he was out and free for many years. But his father-in-law, Freddie Kassab, really worked at bringing this guy to justice, which eventually they did. And Gary Cole plays him in the movie, and I just thought he was really good in this. And then you see him in the Brady Bunch, and you see him on the TV show he had, Midnight Caller, or you see him in Dodgeball. He's just very, because even in the commercial where he's like himself 4 times, past, present, future, etc. He's just Gary Cole, and in this, I mean, he's awesome, and with everybody else around him, it makes for a really good, fun, light comedy. Another comedy I do enjoy, Kevin Kline, Will Smith, Selma Hayek, Kenneth Branagh, I think is how you say his name. We talked about him before. It's a fun, fictitious, historical Western adventure comedy type thing. Kevin Kline is playing dual roles. He plays Artemis in this, but he also plays President Grant, which is kind of cool because we just talked about in class watching the miniseries on the History Channel about Grant. And if you haven't seen that, you guys need to watch the 3-part series. It's terrific. But once again, it comes down to me, Kevin Kline, and Will Smith bantering back and forth. And then you add the girl into it, and then it just has a lot of fun to it. And once again, a lot of acting is based on the continuity of the actors, but for sure with comedy, if two people can play off each other and play that tennis game we're always talking about, comedies can be a lot better than they seem on paper. And this is one of those movies. Yeah, it's not one of the greatest comedies of all time, but I'm a big Kevin Kline fan, and I think Will Smith does a great job here. And it makes for, like I said, a fun historical western that's fictitious. Um, Another great comedy duo, Eddie Murphy and Martin Lawrence in Life. And what's cool about this is they literally make them age throughout the years. And they have a terrific banter from the beginning, and it just gets funnier as they get older. There's something about kid humor, but then there's also something funny about old people humor. We talked about grumpy old men the other day. When you have, because it's almost like kids have permission to say and do whatever they want, and then old people, when they are able to say and do what they want, makes it really, really funny. And like I said, they start off young and then they kind of age through this, and they're funnier as they get older because, once again, old people can get away with stuff. And Martin Lawrence, I think, is hysterical. I love to show Martin. And then Eddie Murphy, we've talked about numerous times through the years. He's just a comedic genius. And this, to me, is a really good, fun comedy. All right, switching gears a little bit. Brendan Fraser, The Mummy. It's kind of a poor man's Indiana Jones. It really doesn't follow the original Mummy story. With that being said, it doesn't necessarily have to. Give me Egypt, give me the pyramids, give me Imhotep, and I'm sold. I think they do a really, really good job with this movie, and the actors do a good enough job. And I actually think all three movies are pretty strong and pretty good. But this is a good reboot to the original Boris Karloff, 1932, I want to say, version of The Mummy. But like I said, give me Egypt, give me Imhotep, and those are right up my alley. So it's a good action thriller type film, and enjoy, of course, the scenery stuff. It's shot great. The sounds are great. It actually is not a bad watch. All right, shifting gears to sports now. I'm going to start with For Love of the Game, Kevin Costner, Kelly Preston. Is there anybody in the history of film who has mastered the sport movie like Kevin Costner, whether it be Bull Durham, Tin Cup, For Love of the Game, Field of Dreams, Draft Day? He's been everything. He's been in baseball. He's been in golf. He's been, in football. And, I really believe that he is the ultimate sports movie actor. And here he is, an aging pitcher with the Detroit Tigers. And it's kind of his story of being injured and working his way back. And it's a love story. And it kind of goes back and forth between his present day pitching to the stories that led up to this point. And it's a good, solid sports film. It's not one of his best. It's not like some of the other ones I named, but it's still, a really, really strong sports, romantic type film. And, like I just said, I don't think anybody's ever mastered it the way Kevin Costner has. He's done an amazing job with him. And this is another one, For Love of the Game. The other sports movie is Any Given Sunday. Several episodes ago, I talked about my disdain for Oliver Stone and the way he shoots films and stuff like that. This is probably one of the few films that he's done that I enjoy, other than maybe JFK. But I hate the way he shoots the football scenes. They're very dizzying and all over the place. But, Al Pacino, Cameron Diaz, Dennis Quaid, Holly Hunter, or Lauren Holly, excuse me, James Woods, Jamie Foxx. This is a deep, and Margaret, deep cast. And so thankfully it is carried by all of the actors in it, and they do a really, really good job. And then on a smaller scale, you add Lawrence Taylor, who was a real football player in it, LL Cool J, and some other people who do fine, and they're good supporting cast of those main people. And it makes for a good, enjoyable film. And, like I said, not a big Oliver Stone guy, but I do enjoy this film overall. and it's probably second to JFK when it comes to Stone films for me. But a good sports movie, and really a true introduction to Jamie Foxx in the film world, which he does a good job as Willie Beeman. So if you haven't seen it, sit down if you have 2.5 hours and enjoy it, and you get a combination of a bunch of stuff mixed in with football. Our last sports movie on the docket today is a really super cool hockey movie called Mystery Alaska, starring Russell Crowe. And it's about this town, Mystery, in Alaska, and they have like their own hockey game on the weekends, and they get a story written about them and how great they are, and they're able to arrange an exhibition game against the New York Rangers to show their skill against the pros, and all the little things that go on within this small town as well. It also stars Burt Reynolds, who just does an unbelievable job, and I really Hank Azaria's in it, Mary McCormick. It's a really good, strong cast, and it's a good, fun, unique story. And it's cool about this little town in Alaska, but then you also get some hockey with it. And when you put all that together, it makes for a pretty strong film. And I don't know if a lot of people know this one. And if you've heard it, I don't know how many people have necessarily watched it, but it's one that is a must watch because the acting's good, but then the story is really strong as well. All right. Next up, Sleepy Hollow, Johnny Depp and Christine Ricci. I love growing up the story of Ichabod Crane and Sleepy Hollow and the Headless Horseman. So when this movie was coming out, I had a high expectation of what was coming with it. And there's parts of it I really, really like. I think Johnny Depp does a good job as Ichabod Crane. And I think Chris Walken as the Headless Horseman is phenomenal. Once again, how can you go wrong with Christopher Walken? But they kind of stray from the true story, the legend of the Headless Horseman story. Ichabod Crane was a kind of a skinny, scrawny schoolmaster. And here, it's Johnny Depp as, an investigator, detective type personality. And then the way that the Headless Horseman exists is kind of a fictitious story. Even though the original one, I get it, is fictitious, they don't really go off of Irving's book. They go off of kind of the base of the characters and then create their own story off of it. But still, the closest thing we're going to get to film other than a cartoon to the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And there's some cool little tidbits with this movie, how they built a little town to be Sleepy Hollow to film it in. They didn't really film it in New York. I think they filmed it in England or something like that. But once again, I like the historical pieces. We're working on that in class right now, living in a different period, different time, different era. And so from the scenery and the clothes and the way they spoke and all of that stuff put together, and then to have the story of the Headless Horseman tied in, makes for a pretty strong film. Next up, and we talked about Edward Norton with American History X the other day, and we talked about Rounders yesterday, and this is him. He's flying high right now. This is him in Fight Club with Brad Pitt, and it's kind of funny because I think Brad Pitt is one of those actors who's kind of aged into being a really, really good actor, and I still think at this point he's not quite there yet, although he's better than some of his early stuff. But Edward Norton is on fire at this point, and so you put those two together, and they do a really good job. Meatloaf as Bob is ridiculously good, and the rest of the surrounding cast. A unique, interesting, fun thriller, kind of different, kind of messes with your mind a little bit. And that's what, once again, we've talked a million times. I'll take the creativity all day long because we're missing that today. And still at this point, there are movies where we had some originality and we had some interesting ideas and you put some good actors in it, and it makes for a pretty good film. And sometimes that's a comedy, sometimes it's in a thriller, sometimes it's in one of these type of films where it's a combination of a few things. Once again, Edward Norton at his finest at this point. Not as good as American History X, as we said, the other day, or was it yesterday? I can't remember. I can't keep these straight anymore. That was probably his best film, along with Rounders. He's good. This he's really good in. So, like I said, these are movies that if you are interested in checking out Edward Norton, you need to start going with. There's others for Brad Pitt I would go with before this, but this is like the start of him kind of figuring out the acting thing and makes a pretty good film. All right. I'm kind of torn of which one I'll go with number one. Um, I guess my runner up will have to be The Phantom Menace. I know a lot of people hate this movie. I'm not a huge fan of it when it comes to Star Wars movies. However, of all these movies, I've probably seen it the most. Um, Liam Neeson is terrific in it. Ewan McGregor does a great job. Natalie Portman does a great job. So the acting's pretty strong. I mean, Jake Lloyd unfortunately just got beat up after doing this. The kid had no chance. But overall, Samuel Jackson's introduced. And so you have a good acting cast to it. The story's just kind of slow, and you kind of wonder if this is why Lucas started with Episode 4 and not Episode 1 in his Star Wars saga. But it still has some good stuff. And like I said, Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor, it's really one of the few Star Wars movies, and maybe the only where you have really true Jedis, right? In most of the movies, everybody's training to be a Jedi or learning how to be a Jedi or learning how to use their powers. Liam Neeson is a Jedi Knight. Ewan McGregor is his, Padawan learner and learning to be the Jedi Knight. But when you see them fight, they're true Jedis. And, add Darth Maul, who I think was wasted as a villain. He was phenomenal. Ray Park plays him. And his role was phenomenal in this. Unfortunately, he's not in many scenes. And he wasn't in any other Star Wars after this, except for his little clip he did in Solo. But unfortunately, he wasn't used more in other Star Wars movies, and unfortunately, he wasn't used more in this. And I mean, how could you know if he was the character was gonna explode or not? But that character is as famous as any character in Star Wars history, especially on the dark side, the Sith side. So I thought the character of Darth Maul with the dual lightsaber and the fight scenes are as good as it gets. And like I said, with Liam Neeson, you can't go wrong. He's as good as he gets in the acting world. I know that they didn't love the boy and they hate Jar Jar Binks. But I can overlook that stuff because it is A, Star Wars movie, and then B, you do have Liam Neeson and you do have, Ray Park as Darth Maul, and, Ewan McGregor as a young Obi-Wan who does great. So, originally I think this was going to be my number one, but I think it just falls just short to Analyze This, and I think it comes down to De Niro and Billy Crystal's comedic timing with each other. And this is really the turn for De Niro. And they started to use him in more comedies, but they used him as his legend in comedies. So here he is still a mob boss, which we've seen in Goodfellas and Godfather and a lot of the movies. Casino, even though he's not a mob boss, kind of that kind of role. And then you take him with Billy Crystal, who's his therapist, and you have some great comedic moments. You're good. I mean, that line alone makes it really strong and funny. They tried to do Analyze That as a sequel. To me, it fell flat. It had some funny moments, but nowhere near the continuity and electricity and energy and comedic timing that they had in this one. So when I was going through the list here at the end, it kind of fell into my lap that Analyze This I've probably seen as many times as Phantom Menace, but because of the acting and the back and forth, I'm going to give a little bit of an edge to this to be my number one for 1999. So as you see, the movies are starting to really kind of dwindle a little bit. There's still some good stuff, but nowhere near some of the years where you're battling, what's going to be number one? Because there's so many good movies. Now you're battling what's going to be number one by default, and that kind of blows. But it's how the nature of our industry is, and it's going as it goes into the 2000s. You'll see more and more as we push forward. On the music side, a couple I just wanted to point out, and then my number one, um, Demons and Wizards. It's a great name for this band because it is a combination of Hansi Kirsch, who's the singer of Blind Guardian, and we talked about his writing and how he likes Tolkien and does all that wizardy, type of writing and music, and then John Schaefer, the guitar player behind Iced Earth, and he's the demon. He likes writing the darker lyrics and the historical, stories of battles and the vampires and all those different kinds of things that that he likes to write about. We talked about Dark Saga the other day about the Spawn comic book, which is a darker comic. But that's where the name comes from, Demons and Wizards, and this is their debut album, and it's really cool. It's a little probably heavier than you guys like, but it has some unbelievable lyrics with some great musicians behind it. All right. Not my favorite Red Hot Chili Peppers album, but Californication is really strong. It has the title track, Scar Tissue, Parallel Universe. This is probably my introduction, not some of the earlier stuff to Red Hot Chili Peppers. There's probably this, and that's probably because this is where they're a little bit less funky style and more rock and roll style. And it's one that probably most of you guys know, and it was like the first one that, like I said, that I really started to listen to by the Chili Peppers. But there is one after this that I liked a lot better, and it is the number one down the road. Next up, another debut album. It's Slipknot. I got into them several albums down the road, and then worked backwards. And I can kind of see when I listen to this album, it's not my favorite Slipknot album, but it is a great introduction to them and all the different sounds and different things they do. I mean, there's 9 guys in the band, and you have the traditional drums, vocals, guitars, bass, that kind of stuff. But then you have, 2 percussionists on top of the drums, and then you have a DJ, and you get those kinds of scratches and those kind of sounds in the music, and so it allows for a much different kind of metal hard rock sound than we were used to in the 80s. And I appreciate originality, and I appreciate differences in music. And I also like the fact that Corey Taylor, who's the vocalist, will do some growling lyrics, but then will also sing. He kind of goes back and forth, and I do like that. I'm not a big fan of the growling, but there are a few bands that I appreciate and enjoy them doing it. But then when you add in the singing with it, it makes for an interesting sound, and they have a very unique, interesting sound. My runner-up for 99 is Joe Strummer and the Mescaleros. Joe Strummer, of course, was from The Clash. This was his last band. He did a few albums with them before he passed away. And, this was it's really good. It opens up with Tony Adams. It has X-Ray Style on it. It has Sandpiper Blues. It has some fun. You kind of hear the Clash, and then you don't hear the Clash. That was the one thing about Joe Strummer when he wrote. He kind of wrote for everything, and we've talked about that. So you get so many different sounds and so many different you get bongos, and you get, of course, the traditional guitars and different things, but you get horns, and you get just so much with him. He was such a talent beyond just being the front person of the Clash, and he was able to show that in the 3 solo albums he did, starting with this one, which is X-Ray. It's Rock Art and the X-Ray Style. And if you're a Clash fan and you're a Joe Strummer fan, you need to give Joe Strummer and the Mescaleros a shot. My number one for 99, Gamma Ray, Power Plant. This is the Japanese version because you get the bonus track on it. We've talked about those. Anywhere in the Galaxies on this. Send Me a Sign. They do a remake of, I believe it's a Pet Shop Boys song, It's a Sin. And that's the one thing cool about metal is that they had an appreciation for pop and they had appreciation for different style of music in the 80s. And you'll see a lot of metal bands do remakes in their own style of those kinds of things. I mean, how many times you hear a power metal band doing Pet Shop Boys? But for some reason, the way that they do it and tie it in, it makes it work. And you know, this album is really from top to bottom another great flowing, you know, power metal melodic Kai Hansen album. And you know, it's hard because unless you appreciate this music, you're not going to appreciate the melodies and the guitars and the things I appreciate as much as something that you may like. But I do ask you guys to at least listen to a song or two and understand, you know, why I like this so much. Another great song on here, Razorblade Sigh, is one of my favorite Gamma Ray songs, and it's just I like the way he does the intro with the guitars and the way he sings it and all those different things, and those are the things that draw me to bands. Is creativity, the little things. We're always talking about the little things, right? The little things. What made them come up with this idea of that guitar intro, or how did they add that little, you know, throw in of horns or whatever it is? They just do such a good job, and that's what talent does, right? The American way. We talked about this in class yesterday. We talked about it, you know, the day before. That the American way is using your creativity and taking risks. And if you take risks with your creativity, you're going to be successful. And you see that in all entertainment facets, right? And that's what I like about the bands that I like, is that they're not afraid to take risks and they're very creative. May not be the way you like it, but that's what draws me to it. So for 99, to finish out the decade, is Gamma Ray's Power Plant. And Analyze This. All right. Hope you guys have a great weekend coming up. We will start with 2000 on Monday. I appreciate the viewing. I appreciate the comments. Make sure if you have not subscribed, do that. And then we'll see you Monday.